Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Deninzon from Kansas and Stratospheerius, and this is Sonic Perspectives.
It's been just a couple of weeks since Joe Deninzon is announced as the new violinist for legendary band Kansas. He takes the seat previously held by the original member, and that was Robby Steinhart, and then by David Ragsdale for so many years. Prior to this new gig, Deninzon was and is the frontman for prog outfit Stratospheerius, leading the proceedings as the designated Jimi Hendrix on the violin. And that's not to mention guest spots, teaching, production, husband, father, and probably a few other things that we just didn't get into. Needless to say, life has been busy, and I'd say life has been pretty good for Joe of late. But he's found some time to talk with me. I'm Mark Boardman, and this is Sonic Perspectives. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Hope you're doing well.
Now, I heard that the story of how you at least got connected with Kansas is sort of interesting. It entails a tomato, a sharp object, and a telephone call.
Word gets around. It was a few months ago. I was running out the door to get to a gig. I was supposed to play at a house party, and we were expecting company. So I offered to help my wife prepare salads and stuff for the guests before I ran out. And in haste, I decided to add one more tomato to one of the salads. And in a hurry, I sliced my finger. I ended up going to the ER. It was my ring finger on my left hand. Very important finger. Had to cancel the gig last minute. Spent 3 hours in the ER getting stitches. And while I was lying there, I got a text from Tom Brislin asking if he could call me. So on my way home, of all the weird times to get a text from Tom, and I've known Tom for a number of years. We're both in the prog community, and I've seen his bands. He's seen my band. So I called him, and he said, well, David's got some personal issues. We're not sure if he's going to be able to tour, and we just want to make sure that there's somebody there in case, they have to step in. Would you be interested in checking out the music? And I said, sure, absolutely. So I got a call from Phil Ehart the next day saying that he had been checking out my stuff with Stratospheerius on YouTube and really liked my music and liked my playing. So they wanted to have me as a backup in case David couldn't do the tour. I started doing a deep dive into the set list, into the music. It was a lot of hard work because nothing's written down. I had to kind of transcribe everything. And it was a lot of memorization and really analyzing what David did and what Robby did. And I was kind of on standby, and there was on and off. It wasn't, I couldn't really make it public. It was on and off for many weeks, and finally, a few weeks ago, I think second week of May, Tom called and said that you're doing the tour, and David wasn't able to do it, so get ready to go. It's going to be a wild ride. And I had the music already pretty much learned, I knew what songs they were going to play, and it was just a matter of getting together with Tom, reviewing it, and then flying to Georgia to rehearse with the band.
Now, while you may have been told that's the first week or two of May, it was kept pretty secret then for another couple of weeks. You knew about this when you did the May 31st party, if you will, a debut party for your Stratospheerius live album. Were you able to share that with other people there or just keep it quiet?
By that time it had been announced. It was May 23rd that they issued the press release that I was going to be doing the gig.
That still must have been sort of weird to be doing an unveiling for one group's album while your head is already starting to think about, boy, I'm going to have to start doing gigs with this band in a couple of days.
Yeah, it was tricky. It was a lot of brain juggling because Kansas music is very hard and Stratospheerius music is very hard. And we played those songs with Stratospheerius for years and years, so it was muscle memory. But my mind was already kind of trying to focus on the upcoming Kansas, the first show I had with Kansas. So it was a crazy week because I was in Macon, Georgia, rehearsing with them for 3 days. Mega marathon all day rehearsals, a lot of hard work, and then I had to fly home, rehearse with my band, play the show, and the next day fly to Pittsburgh to play with Kansas. So you can imagine I was pretty exhausted.
I bet. How was that first show? Were you adrenalized to the point that it didn't matter?
I was. I thought I would be freaking out a lot more than I was. I had done a lot of homework. I knew the music. I was prepared. It was just trying not to be nervous. And I think it went very smoothly, considering there were a few little things, little memory holes that were filled later, but that always happens on a first show.
Yeah.
But overall, I was pretty happy, and I think the guys were pretty happy. The audience, I got a great reception from the audience. So.
Mm-hmm. And you're never quite sure when you're replacing somebody who's been around for 20-some years, just exactly how they're going to accept you on a night like that.
I was well aware it was a very sensitive situation because David was so beloved by his bandmates and by the fans, and I thought I would get a lot of backlash, like, who's this guy? Bring David back. And I have the deepest respect for him as a person, as a musician. So I was just hoping that, no one would throw tomatoes at me. There's the tomato theme.
There you go. Or sharp knives.
Or sharp knives, yeah, even worse. So I was just trying to honor the music and honor the parts that David and Robby created and honor the legacy of the band. And that was it wasn't just learning the music, it was the pressure of how will the fans receive me, and they have fans all over the world who had been following them for 50 years. So it was that and dealing with that pressure, but everybody has been very welcoming. 99.9% of the people have only given me positive feedback and well wishes, so I was very grateful for that. And
absolutely, that's great. You mentioned something that is interesting, and that is the fact that you are transcribing stuff. A lot of prog musicians that I know, if they're joining a new group or joining a group that's already been in existence for a while, they sort of listen to it, memorize the part, and do it that way. But that's apparently not your method.
Everybody's got their path to the music. I'm very visual. I like to transcribe stuff and just have everything on the page in front of me. Not all the guys in Kansas read music. I think Tom and I are the only ones. Tom Brislin. We both went to school for music. What the advantage of that is, I can have all the music in a Dropbox and just look at my phone and memorize stuff while I'm sitting somewhere. I don't always have to be listening to it. And that's how I absorb the information. The funny thing is, my family had a trip planned to Disney World. It was like a couple weeks after I got asked to learn the music. So I transcribed a lot of the stuff. So while I was in line for the rides at Disney, I was staring at my phone, learning Kansas music. It was a good way to pass the time.
I'll bet. Now, if you just find some way to keep the kids occupied while you're standing in line.
Yeah, they had their phones, man. It was all good. It worked out. But yeah, that's how I function, and I understand that not everybody functions like that. But I like to write things out. And when I write for Stratospheerius, I write out everything, and I hand it to them, and then we change it. But at least there's like that foundational thing you can refer to,
And I assume because of your talent and experience, when you have it written out that way, transcribed, you can hear it in your head at the same time.
Yes, yeah, I'm very good with that, and it was also just not having the luxury of being with my instrument all the time. It was a good way to use my time, to budget my time and learn the music without actually having the violin in my hands.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we should mention, when it comes to education, that you got your undergraduate degree at Indiana University, which is where I got my undergraduate degree as too. And certainly not in music, but we were there a little bit different time periods. But the music school has always been top notch. Isn't that where you met your wife?
I did. We actually met in the cafeteria where all the music students would hang out.
Really?
Across the street from the music school, yeah. We were introduced by a mutual friend. Yeah, it's funny how that happens.
You were both violinists. Were you studying with the same teachers?
Not at first, but during my last year, we had the same teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How was it that the two of you diverged so much, musically speaking? She went into classical music. She's now with the New York Philharmonic. And you decided to take it towards more rock, progressive jazz, that sort of thing.
Well, I think it's just what you love, what you're drawn to. My father is a classical violinist. He was in the Cleveland Orchestra for 44 years. He just retired. And there's a music school for gifted kids in St. Petersburg where my dad is an alumnus, and Yulia is as well. So they had some of the same teachers, believe it or not. And she was on a clear path to be a classical violinist from age 5. And there was really no other option for string players in Russia. It's a very traditional kind of musical world there.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I came here when I was 4 years old and I was studying classical, but I got really into, rock and roll and pop culture, and later fell in love with jazz and really wanted to be creative. And I didn't see much of a creative path being just an orchestra musician. And I didn't get excited about the prospect of, music as an Olympic event when you're learning a really hard piece of music to play it perfectly, to execute it perfectly, but you're not really creating. You're not writing or composing anything or improvising anything. It's more, how perfect can you nail this passage and how many hours can you practice? And it's like learning a gymnastics routine. To some respect, that's not, what music is about for me. So I wanted to go deeper, and I felt like I needed to express myself where I would be forever kind of in a straitjacket to some degree. So it's just what you're drawn to. I was drawn to Jerry Goodman and Jean-Luc Ponty and those kinds of players from an early age. That was like, yeah, man, that's what I want to do. That really rang my bell.
Yeah. Jerry Goodman, who was with the Flock out of Chicago and then the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and Jean-Luc Ponty, who is an amazing, amazing player, who I happened to see back in the 1970s. He's really remarkable. Did you listen to? No, I'm sorry. Did you also happen to listen to Kansas and to Steinhart during that time period? Because you were, when they just started really hitting it huge. Well, that was about the time you were coming along. Period.
I was always listening. That goes without saying. I was always listening to Kansas, and in the 80s, growing up watching MTV, Dust in the Wind would be on, and Point of No Return was one of my favorite songs, and Wayward Son. And of course, I knew those 3 big hits, and then I got deeper into their catalog later. But that goes without saying. Robby was a huge influence, and, all those guys. And the writing is incredible.
Yeah. What was the difference between, let's say, trying to play along with the music when you were young, and then actually sitting in with the band and playing that same music and the same licks when you're in your 40s?
That was very, I got to tell you, the moment it hit me when we were in rehearsal and they called Wayward Son for the first time, and I went into that opening a cappella chorus, because I'm singing backup vocals as well, and I'm realizing I'm singing with this song with these guys. I look to my right, I look to my left, and I was like, is this real? Am I dreaming? Is this really happening? It was just one of those trippy, surreal moments, but also I got to listen to the isolated tracks from David and some of the stuff from Robby, so I really had to dig deep and analyze what they were doing, and it wasn't always what I thought it had been, when I was listening to it in the mix. So there were certain phrases and certain notes that they played differently. And I also studied some of the old live recordings, videos on YouTube, how Robby would play a certain solo versus how David would play it. And sometimes I had to guess what people would prefer to hear, how much of myself I could bring into it. So it was a lot of adjustments, a lot of balancing, but I also gained a deeper respect for both of those guys. And I already had deep respect for them because those are not easy shoes to fill. And it's a lot of multitasking. It's violin and guitar and singing and doing all of that at the same time sometimes. So there's no downtime in that set list. You're always on. You always got to be alert and ready to go, which is fun. It's exhausting and exhilarating,
We should mention that in terms of Carry On Wayward Son, you're playing guitar on that one, as Ragsdale did.
I'm playing only guitar on Carry On Wayward Son. I'm playing guitar on about 25% of the show, and I've been playing guitar since I was 15. It's kind of a secondary instrument for me. People know me as a violinist, so I don't get hired a lot as a guitar player. So I'm able to scratch that itch on this job, which is great.
And I would think the vocal harmonies of a group like that really scratch another itch.
Yeah, it's fun to sing with those guys because you're such great singers, especially Ronnie. Oh my God, So it's just, I love singing harmonies. I've written a lot of music that's inspired by Kansas. So, yeah, it's just on so many levels. It's rewarding creatively, and they're great people too. So
you talked about how you really went deep to see what those guys, your predecessors, had been doing in terms of the music. I know it's awfully early in the process, but how much of yourself, your own talents, your own expression, your musical voice, if you will, are you able to put into the music at this point?
I'm doing a few things. I'm very careful with that because my ground zero is playing as much of. I learned most of David's solos, note per note, because that's what the fans are used to hearing, and Robby's solos, of course, and that's what like Richard Williams is used to hearing in his ears. There's a solo at the end of Dust in the Wind that's not on the studio version that David always played live.
Yeah.
Said, learn that solo because the guys are kind of used to it, and it'll make the transition easier. And I'm like, sure, absolutely, it's a great solo. But there's moments where I get to stretch out and do my own thing on certain songs. I've also utilized, I'm playing a 7-string electric violin, and David played a 5-string. Actually, I'll show it to you. I have it right
here. Mm-hmm.
This is my Viper, Markwood Viper that I use on the Kansas show. So
very cool.
I'm able to use I'm able to play distortion and double the rhythm guitar parts, make it kind of a meatier sound in certain sections, which David didn't do that. That's kind of my thing. Mm-hmm. I use a little bit more overdrive on certain solos, little things like that. I'm not going to do a radical departure because there's a certain legacy to the way the violin was used in Kansas music.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So it's a balance, and I always constantly ask the guys for feedback. Is this too much? Is this, would you rather I be more traditional here? So far I get the sense that they're happy with what I'm doing. So.
Good. So what was the most difficult Kansas song to learn?
Oh man, I got to think about it. Well, Song for America is a very complicated song. It's also my favorite song because there's so much cool violin parts in that song, and there's a lot of solos and features and just great vocal parts and great ensemble parts. It's a roller coaster ride, that song. The other one is Icarus 1 because that's the most challenging because I'm changing instruments while I'm singing. It goes back and forth, violin, guitar. It's a lot of multitasking, and a lot of things could go wrong. I think the first night I got tangled because I have a violin that straps on and I use a guitar strap. So I got two instruments I'm wearing at the same time. What David was doing was putting one down and picking one up. I didn't want to do that, but I think I got tangled up in guitar and violin straps the first night, and I was like, oh no, this is off to a bad start, but I was just trying to stay calm and untangle myself. The next day I had to really come up with a strategy on the second show, like what is the best way to, when's the best time to change instruments with minimal damage, and what instrument should be on top, all these little kind of details. It's choreography. Yeah,
choreography and logistics and the type of thing they do not teach you in college.
No, they don't. They also speaking of college, if you're a string player, they don't prepare you for the real world in the sense that unless you're strictly in the classical realm, you're going to meet a lot of people that don't read music, that are self-taught.
Yeah.
that are at a very high level in their career, and you can't be a snob about it. You got to respect how people, arrive at their musical destination and what they've contributed to the world, and you can't look at everything through the same criteria, the same prism that a lot of classical musicians get caught in.
It wouldn't pay for you to go up with your transcription and say, "Hey, this is what I'm playing here. Shouldn't you be doing this?" And they're scratching their heads, going, "Huh?"
No, sometimes they get annoyed when you do. You think you are. It's They also told me, Phil Ehart told me that he had done master classes at music schools, and when he said he didn't read, a bunch of people walked out. It's like, dude, how many records have you sold?
Really?
You've written that are sung 50 years later. You can't put the same criteria on everything, on all music. People get trapped in their own schooling sometimes, and that's the biggest lesson I've learned in 25 years of doing this. And that's why I love working with all kinds of musicians and all kinds of people, because everybody's got something to teach you that you that's what
if you listen.
If you're open to being taught,
Yeah. If you're not, you don't get anything, and you're probably not going to collaborate very well.
You're going to miss out on a lot of amazing experiences.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a specific set list that they're doing night after night after night. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you didn't have to memorize 50 years worth of Kansas's music.
No, because Kansas doesn't even memorize 50 years of their own music. There's some songs they haven't played live in years that they're bringing back on this tour that they had to go study up on. Richard Williams recorded, I think, The Pinnacle. Maybe it was in the 70s. I don't think he's played it since the 80s. I don't know when the last time they played certain things. And they had to do their homework too. That doesn't all just stay there. Those songs are hard. If you don't keep up with them, they escape you.
Yeah. The mental abilities, you only have so much space in there.
And I mean, they plan their programs in advance and prepare them. It can't be too spontaneous just because the music is so challenging. And they actually had more songs planned that I had to learn that they ended up cutting just because of time.
Could we shift gears just a little bit and talk about Stratospheerius? Because originally, when I was thinking we're going to get together like this, we were going to talk strictly about Stratospheerius. And things change, of course. We have to be adaptive.
This happened that way, yeah.
Yeah. For those people who are going to be introduced to you through Kansas, and that's going to be substantial, define for them as best possible in words what your other band is about, what they're like.
Stratospheerius, as soon as people see a violin in a progressive rock band, they think of Kansas.
Yeah.
That's just because they were the first that, really, and created the template. Stratospheerius is my brainchild. I started it 23 years ago, and it came about from my love of, rock fusion, jazz, progressive rock, the electric violin, but also my love of songwriting and songs with hooks. And originally it was an instrumental project, and I started writing more and more vocal songs, and I'm the lead singer and the front man of that band. For years we toured as a 4-piece, so without a keyboard. So that's a big difference from Kansas. It's more of an open sound. We're adding keyboards back. We had Bill Hubauer recording our upcoming studio album that we've been working on for a bunch of years. The difference, the way I approach playing in that band is I use a lot more effects. I use, a lot more distortion, delay, whammy, all kinds of flangers and wahs and all kinds of stuff. I'm really into sonic architecture and exploring. I don't always just want a violin to sound like a violin. I like to go deeper. It's almost like it took the role of the keyboard in the band that wasn't in the band before. And it's melodic, hard rock, progressive rock, and I think Kansas fans would enjoy it. There's a lot of similarities, but there's differences.
There's certainly some classical touches to both bands, but as you say, I think there's probably a little bit more jazz side of things with Stratospheerius than there is for Kansas.
Well, I was a jazz major. I got my master's degree in jazz, so harmonically, I do incorporate some jazz elements. And on the new live record, we did a cover of Spain, which wasn't really Stratospheerius with Rachel Flowers and Alex Skolnick.
Mm-hmm.
But, definitely the Jean-Luc Ponty influence and Didier Lockwood and some of those players, that's there for sure. I'm more of a rock guy, but jazz is also in my musical DNA.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you use the same instrument for Kansas and for Stratospheerius?
Yes, actually, my main weapon of choice for most electric gigs is my Mark Wood Viper.
Mm-hmm.
Because I love once you go with seven, it's hard to go back with seven strings because I have a lot more flexibility and versatility, and a lot of the parts I write are specifically for those low strings, and also it has a harness system which enables me to just strap it to my chest and not hold it with my chin. As a singer, it's just very freeing and makes it easier to sing. And it also has frets, which is great for power chords and intonation, and and I don't use frets as a crutch. I also play regular violin with no frets. So there are those that go, "Hey, why are you playing with frets? That's cheating or something." But that's BS in my opinion.
When did you get exposed to this particular instrument? Because that's not the sort of thing they'd have at IU, I wouldn't think.
Well, I got my first electric violin in 1996 when I was a student at IU, and that was a 6-string. I always knew I wanted to get an extended range instrument, and it was a 6-string made by Eric Jensen out of Seattle. Then I heard about Mark Wood, and I moved to New York, and I met him. I saw one of his concerts, and I saw his violin, and I'm like, that's meant for me. I got to get one of those. And sure enough, a few years later, I bought my first Viper. So, and it never looked back. And there's a lot of great electric violin luthiers out there. And I recognize the Viper is not for everybody, but it works for me. That's it.
It's all it counts right there. You have been with Stratospheerius, as you say, the front man. You have to take a step back with Kansas. You have to be part of the ensemble more than the guy who's out there and being wild and singing the lead and that sort of thing. Is that a challenging transition?
Not really, because I'm a sideman a lot. Stratospheerius doesn't perform that much. We perform throughout the year, but we make it an event. The rest of my life as a freelance musician, I'm backing up somebody else. So you got to know your role in any given situation. And I get as much. It's very rewarding for me to just make someone else sound good and do my thing, and I don't always have to be the front man. And I knew my role going in as soon as I was asked to join the band. Mm-hmm. And there's still plenty of time for me. There's opportunities for me to step out center stage and do a crazy solo and, try to blow people away and then step back and just take a back role. So I do get to satisfy that, that need, but I'm totally fine with having an accompanying role in a band.
Mm-hmm. We would be remiss not to mention that the album is called Behind the Curtain, live at ProgStock, and has some performances at that august presentation from 2019 and 2021. You've been at ProgStock. Are those the 2 years, or you've been there more than that?
Stratospheerius has played there, I guess, 4 times. Mm-hmm. Count the virtual one they had in 2020 during the pandemic. We did a virtual concert. So we played the After Hours set in 2018. We played the main stage in 2019, which is part of this DVD. And then last minute, we got asked to fill in for John Goodsall in 21 and headline the main stage when he fell ill. And so they've had us 4 times. But I show up at ProgStock every year. Last year I played with I sat in with 4 different bands there. I was like the house violinist. So they're like family. Tom and Ann are like two of my dearest friends, and everybody. It's just such a great community of people.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I'm hanging out there every year, no matter what. Hanging out with musicians and catching up with friends, you know.
It's a reunion.
It really is. Yeah, yeah. There's my family. There's my family of weirdo string players. That's a whole other scene. And there's my progressive rock family that, you know, it's a good group of people. Absolutely.
Now, I know that you had to shuffle some things around once the Kansas gig became concrete, and it wasn't just you may be the backup, whatever. What happens to Stratospheerius at this point?
Well, I'm actually about to, like, when I get off the phone with you, I have to do some tracking for probably our last song on our new studio record. So we've been working on this record for 3 years. We're slow. Between all the other things, life gets in the way, but it's going to be done. We just released the live DVD. Studio record is almost in the can, and that'll be released early next year. And we have a few shows we've booked in September when Kansas has a break. So September 28th will be at Debonair Music Hall in Teaneck, and September 30th in Kennett Flash in Philly. So our plan is to play shows when Kansas has a break, when we're all in town. We're not going to do heavy touring, obviously, and Kansas has to be my priority. But I'm going to keep Stratospheerius going, and we're going to keep writing and recording music because we love to do it, and we like working with each other, and people like the band, so why not?
Yeah, yeah.
We gain some new fans from the Kansas experience, too.
I have no doubt about that. I imagine that the streaming for Stratospheerius has gone up over the last couple of weeks.
We got some bumps for sure.
Yeah. Hopefully some bumps that will transfer into some cash as well.
Yeah, well, it's hard to get rich these days on streaming, and
well, I'm not talking streaming. I'm talking people who will actually buy the music.
There are those that still buy music, believe it or not.
Yes, I know.
They're in a minority, but I'm grateful for any purchases, you know.
Go along with that. In terms of Kansas, I know you've just joined up. Things are still new. It's like a new car. It's got the little smell inside, the whole bit. Have they talked at all about doing any additional new music? Because Kansas has put out a couple of great albums in recent years.
I love Absence of Presence. I think it's one of the best albums in years. Well, they've said good things about my writing because they've heard the work I do with Stratospheerius. I think if I never had Stratospheerius, I don't know if I would have been invited to join Kansas. Mm-hmm. So there have been hints that they're going to tour through the end of January, and it might even be extended. But there's hints about writing a new record. So let's see what happens. I would love to be involved in that to whatever degree they would have me involved. But it's nothing is off the table. Let's put it that way. As far as I know.
Well, if you'd had the table all full, you wouldn't have been ready for Kansas when that opportunity came about earlier in the year.
It kind of reminded me, because full disclosure, Stratospheerius was my passion project, and I was losing money on it. I just, we've toured all over. I've keep putting out records and writing and questioning my life choices, but something kept compelling me to keep doing it. And it reminded me of, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where what's the main actor, the main character for you? Richard Dreyfuss. He keeps molding the mountain, and he doesn't know why he's doing it. He's just continuing to mold it, and then the aliens show up. It kind of feels like that.
I don't know that I've heard of Ehart and Williams described as aliens before,
right,
but,
I don't know, but
he didn't mean it that way. He didn't mean it.
I don't know. They might take that as a compliment. I don't know.
It seems to me, I was looking over the schedule for your concerts with Kansas. It's not too bad. You generally have a couple of concerts that are close together, and then 5 days to a week that's off before the next one.
It's the best possible situation for someone like myself. I have two kids. They're 14 and 10, so I get to be home and be a father and see my kids, and then go out on the weekends. It's like Clark Kent and Superman, whatever. But it's the best of both worlds. I've only experienced it for 1 week, but it's way better than going on a tour bus for months and months. And they have been doing it this way for years, and they love it this way. And it's actually, I think, more cost efficient for them than just driving for days and days and paying for buses and hotels. And shows are better attended on weekends anyway.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
So it's great. At this stage of my life, I couldn't be happier with that kind of a setup.
It's amazing when these things crop up in your life. Just when you started thinking about how long can I continue doing this, maybe from a financial, maybe from another standpoint, it just opens up.
Yeah, like you're chasing a childhood dream, and you kind of feel like Don Quixote after a while. Like, what am I doing? I mean, I was busy as a working musician. I was playing weddings and Broadway shows and recording and teaching, doing the thing, all the stuff, and which I love. I love all of those things. But I didn't have to do this original project. I could just coast as a freelance musician, which a lot of people do. I just felt like I need to have this in my life. It drives me crazy, but yet I think I'd go crazy without it too. So I just need to write and record and create and perform for people. And, I feel like I got something to say. So life is short. You got to just grab it, And
now you've got a couple of different palettes to express that.
Yeah, I'm grateful to the universe, and it's kind of surreal, but it's been a lot of years, a lot of ups and downs.
Yeah. Can you remind people, if they're wanting to get hold of Behind the Curtain Live at ProgStock by Stratospheerius, where can they find that? Go to,
two websites, stratosband.com, that's STRATOS band.com, or my website, joedeviolin.com. And there you can link to our Bandcamp and all our social media handles, and that's the best ways to find us.
Mm-hmm. Including mentions of where you might be playing in the future.
Yeah, I try to keep that updated. There's not a lot of gigs outside of Kansas coming up, but I do have a few things. Stratospheerius is playing again in September, and I have one gig that's not a Kansas gig, July 2nd, with Brooklyn Raga Massive at Culture Lab in Long Island City, and that's a Mahavishnu tribute band I play with.
Mm-hmm.
Mahavishnu Chakti. It's a lot of fun.
I'll bet it is, yeah. Joe Deninzon is the new violinist with Kansas, as well as guitarist and singer and guy who switches the straps from one way to the next instrument.
Hopefully without causing too much damage.
Without too much damage. And he is also the lead man for Stratospheerius. And just from my standpoint, this is a band that if you haven't heard them, please do so. They are a great, great operation. Joe, thanks very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Really appreciate it. It's great to talk to you.
Good to talk to you, too. For the latest in news, reviews, and interviews, turn to sonicperspectives.com. And I'm Mark Boardman.